I'm delighted to introduce the first discussion today of two, which, as I said, is our last session before lunchtime. So this discussion is going to be chaired by David Gelsthorpe. So as I said, I'd like to invite them all to turn their cameras on, and I'm going to leave it to David to introduce the theme and also to introduce our wonderful panel.
Hello, everyone. Thanks ever so much for a fantastic morning. It's been brilliant to hear everybody's thoughts and all the great presentations. And really fantastic to see the Mentimeter workloads. It's really interesting, particularly for the fantastic conversations we're going to have shortly. We've got an amazing panel, which I'm really excited about what we're going to discuss. I'll just introduce myself properly. First of all, I'm David Gelsthorpe. I'm chair of the Museums and Galleries Accreditation Scheme for the UK, and also curator of the science collections at Manchester Museum. And I will pass over to Miranda, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Miranda Lowe and I work as a principal curator at the Natural History Museum. And some of you may know me more recently or recent times discussing what does it mean to decolonise natural history. And I'm very much as a curator documenting collections and access to data.
Brilliant, thanks, Arran.
Hi everyone, I'm Arran Rees. I am the Museum Data Officer. My name has been thrown around a few times today already. The Museum Data Officer for the Museum Data Surveys and Collections Trust. But I also have another hat for part of the week where I am a research fellow on the Congruence Engine towards National Collection Tank Project at the Science Museum. Yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting today. Thanks.
Brilliant, thanks. Justine.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, David. Hi, yes, I'm Justine Reilly. I'm the Director of Sporting Heritage, which is Subject Specialist Network, and also the Neurodiverse Museum and other Subject Specialist Network. And I chair the Subject Specialist Network Consortium. Good to be here today.
Excellent, thank you. I should have said as well, if you have questions, do put them in the question and answer box, and I'll do my best to keep track of those. So without further ado, how will greater access to collections data be a game changer for the sector? Who would like to start from our panel?
I can start if you like. I think it will be a game changer in terms of more transparency across the sector, as long as we keep advertising the fact that we have this service to others. And with that transparency, what I really like about it, and in fact, during the break, I was having a little search myself. I just put a search word in and it was just crab. And I realised, because that's some of the collections that I look after in terms of natural history. So there are things on earthenware at Fitzwilliam, but also actual crabs at Nottingham Museum. So I was road testing it already. But for me, I think it's also a game changer in terms of bringing about, I think a lot of us do collaborate already, but much better collaboration, more well-informed to know where things are, because as we know, collections may have historically come in together, but because of the various disciplines, they have been split into those across various museums or different departments within museums. So it's kind of like collating all of that together, and then we can form better research projects, collaborating internally and externally outside of the museum in terms of that. So yeah, that's why I think it's really important to have this service.
Thank you, Miranda. Tip of the iceberg, I think. Arran, would you like to come in next?
Yeah, of course. Whereas Miranda searched for crab, I always search for cat. And so, yeah, just a search of cat on the Museum Data Service already throws up over 21,000 museum objects, which is always really exciting. So what has been really, what I think the MDS, and just sharing data more generally, but because I'm talking in the context of MDS here, definitely, it's just going to open up many opportunities for collaboration, as Miranda said, for researchers, but also within the sector itself. I just think the opportunity, when I've been like helping people come onto the service themselves, wow, just the idea that I could search when I'm doing an exhibition, search and find out what objects exist in other museums. It's actually unbelievable that we haven't been able to do that as a sector in the past, that we haven't had that ability, and it relies on, of course, the subject specialist network are brilliant at doing that and making these connections, but having that as something that's just accessible to anybody who's working in the museum, I think that's going to be a complete game changer for the sector. And I'll just stick with one for now, because I mean, there's so many things we could talk about, but I think the ability to loan and do exhibitions in a different way is going to be amazing.
Brilliant, thanks, Justine.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would agree that it definitely has that opportunity to allow people to search much more clearly and accurately for various different subject areas or collection specific. I think there's going to need to be a lot of support in terms of, if I'm thinking about sport, and when I search for sport, there aren't many. If you just use that subject term, so it's thinking about how are we categorizing collections, and for us as subject specialist networks, that's something that we can be always thinking about and sharing that knowledge and ensuring that there's support for subject specialist networks to be doing that. A lot of us are, very tiny and need that capacity and that support to be able to do it. So for example, with sport, we already have a database of distributed collections. How do we work with you to make sure that we can share that? Because that would be so valuable to make sure that it's all in that one place and that they talk to each other. So if someone's coming to ours, how do they ensure that they can go and see that on the museum database as well? So it's really exciting to be able to ensure that we can collect all of that. And also, there are multiple levels in terms of a lot of our collections. So yes, we have this big collection of sport in our database, but they cut across fashion and science and medicine. How do we ensure that that happens? And how do we ensure that we can share all of those collections with everybody else? So it's exciting for our network and the networks that we support, that they'll be able to search in those different ways.
And what do you think subject specialist networks might be able to bring that we perhaps haven't been able to really make the most of before?
So we've got 50 subject specialist networks across the UK. So there's a lot of us covering so many different types of collections. We're all led by knowledge experts and specialists, and a lot of our collections are outside of the museum sector. So if museums are looking to be representative and reflective of the communities that they serve, lots of the work that you can do with subject specialist networks can help that happen, because even if those collections are held outside of the sector, I mean, if you look at sport again, museums weren't interested in sport until, and often still aren't, but until maybe kind of the 90s, and we started looking at a shift in how representative we are of the communities we worked with. So those collections don't exist in museums. So if you don't work with community groups, with various different organisations that have got them, then you can't create exhibitions and activities and provision based on that collection. So I think SSNs have got that real opportunity to bridge those gaps and to support the data service and museums to understand, okay, where are those collections? How do we access them? How do we support? Because often that's some of the work that we're doing. We're helping museums tie up with those outside of the sector and vice versa, because they've got the specialist knowledge often. They don't have the specialist understanding of how to look after their collections, remove them from risk, make sure that they're on somewhere like the database.
Brilliant, thanks. So I think it's really, really obvious for us in the museum world to see how amazing this would be for doing exhibitions and caring for collections, all that stuff. But why should people outside of museums care? What difference is it going to make?
Well, I think the difference it will make is that in terms of, well, anything, whatever community that we are serving, that they have access to, for instance, their history. So I've done a lot of things around decolonial practice within the sector. So there could be items and objects placed within that data that is applicable to their historical research. And it's about, because the way I say it's a game changer about transparency, it's changing the image of the sector as well. There were, as we all know, there were big changes since 2020, but it's still keeping up that momentum that we are accessible. We are here for you. That I think earlier on we were talking about enhancement of data as well. So we also want, as well as transparency, but if people have more lived experiences, a phrase that we're using a lot more now, more cultural information to enhance some of the records, then that can be input also. And I think in terms of data across the board and all of those interconnectivities as well, it would also, in terms of the information that we're finding and looking at things holistically, allow people, why should people care? Why should people care about objects in museums? And through better collaborations and more creativity. Because yesterday I was at the BBC and they had a one-day conference around climate creatives, and there were a lot of chief execs from different TV companies, and actually they were using the word gatekeeper about our sector. And you'll see through the recording that I said, you know, we're much better than that. You know, I said I'm the least gatekeeperish person there is, and you know, and a lot more of us are, you know, opening up, and this is opening up the access to our collections, at least data-wise, and then more physically, you know, understand there's not images on there, because that also does impact on accessibility as well, because I found that just by searching crab, I was like, I really want to see what things look like before I delve deeper. But then, you know, it can be signposted to elsewhere, and then how you can get a better connection and actually see what these items are.
Yeah, how are they ever going to know about links to their own cultural heritage and identity if they don't even know museums have these objects in the first place? Brilliant. Would you like to come in, Arran?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to be really revolutionary for researchers as well, more generally. So, of course, there's loads of communities that museums serve, but I'm going to put on a slightly different hat for a second. So, in my little tank hat. So, working on the Congruence Engine project, we worked with loads of amazing other kind of heritage organizations. Trying to get data was a major part of that project. If the MDS existed at the start of the Congruence Engine project, we would have saved ourselves months, and we would have saved the documentation, collections management teams in those museums a whole lot of time as well. This idea that the MDS is now going to kind of just share once, share out many, it facilitates this access in a completely different way. So researchers can really start thinking creatively about how they can engage with museum collections in a way that's always felt like a bit of a barrier in terms of them having to go individually, but also the museums having the resource to deal with all the individual requests for exports of data. I think it just opens up this kind of this wondrous idea of what research might be possible and how we can then use collections better because that data is there in a place that's kind of easily attainable. So yeah, as Miranda said, it kind of removes the gatekeeper element to it. It's just potentially really, really exciting.
Brilliant. Thanks, Justine.
Yeah, and I think it's going to depend on what's shared on there as well. You know, in terms of people coming back and thinking, yeah, this is for me, this is relevant. It's going to depend on how much we open it out and how much we make sure that that is sharing all of those wider collections of museums. I just did another quick search for autism, and there are no collections that come under that title, and there's quite only a few that actually have it within those object records. So if I was coming to look at for the Neurodiversity Museum and thinking about, so what do we have nationally when I'm coming and putting the case studies together that are on the database, I might then go, well, there's nothing there, and I might not come back. So it's making sure that at the stage that we're opening this out and saying, you have to come and use this, this is so important, it's so relevant to you, that it is, that people come and look at it and go, yeah, okay, that is for me. I can see that absolutely can support my research and take some of the time away and help hook me up with the different organisations that can support what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to share externally. Yeah, I hope that made sense. I saw that somebody else had searched for a different term, and likewise, it hadn't shown many in there. So if you're looking for that kind of representation, and again, the lived experience, and you're trying to ensure that this reflects you, I think as a sector, we need to ensure that it absolutely does that, and we don't go down the kind of that route again of it being, it's the traditional collections and it's the traditional stuff that we share on there, that we make sure it really does democratise what we're doing.
Brilliant. So you kind of touched on one of the limitations at the moment, I guess, is the infancy of it, really, and not all organisations are on there, not all collections are on there, and if you go on and try to search for something and it doesn't come up, you may well not come back, certainly for a little while. Any feelings about what some of the drawbacks and limitations might be from the rest of the panel? So, for example, Miranda, is this going to help us solve climate change?
For some, well, the descriptions that I found on there just from the word crab, probably not entirely, but see, I'm already from this sector, but you know, so just from searching for the word crab, so I distinguished from what were images of crabs on earthenware, and then there were actually, interestingly, some scientific names of crabs at Nottingham museums. So then I might go down that route to pursue a little bit more to find the exact data, you know, of where they've been collected from, what region. So in terms of biodiversity and climate change research, you do need, you know, the who, where, what, you know, when, where it was collected from for it to inform your research. So it's at the moment halfway house there, but because I have the knowledge, but it's not really about that. It's about being, as Justine was saying, more access, you know, access for who, when we say accessibility, you need to signpost people to elsewhere to drill down and get more data, or, you know, have those, you know, talking about the content that it's under development. We only have so much information at this point, but there's more coming, all of those kind of things to make people want to come back, not just to leave it there, as Justine was saying. So it's a halfway house for me, but yes, but potentially it can help, especially looking at complementary collections as well for my scientific discipline in environmental data. So not just at the NHM, but there might be another hub elsewhere that can inform that. So yes, it will get there. We've got to believe in it. We've got to have hope.
That's good to hear. Arran, could you say something about data and who it's for and audiences? And actually, I'm quite conscious that it is one of only kind of one amalgamated data collection searches amongst quite a few across Europe, particularly. How do you feel that might evolve? And is it a question of all museums putting all their data in lots of different places, or the museum's data service being the panacea that will solve all problems? How do you feel about the way forwards?
I think what is really good about the museum data service that makes it different from some of the other kind of data sharing kind of aggregating approaches is that it is, as Kevin said, it's kind of utilitarian. It's there, it's the data. It is as it is in the collections. It's not being curated specially for a specific look. There isn't a specific data model you have to align to. We're just sharing under the guise of transparency, accountability, and the fact that museums do have a responsibility to share the data they have on their collections. So I think that's what's really quite wonderful about museum data service in its simplicity on kind of looking at it. Very, very complex behind the scenes, and I definitely don't want to say that it was an easy task to do. But yeah, I think that's what's really nice about it. And I suppose there's more and more kind of confidence in using the word data as well, and understanding our collections catalogues as data, and understanding what that means. You asked about drawbacks earlier on, and there is this kind of, there's almost like a cold-heartedness to just showing data without it contextualized and being beautiful and having nice images. But I think that's what it's there for. It's there to be used. So yeah, I think there's a growing confidence in the sector in understanding that the material they hold is data, and that I think the Museum Data Service will hopefully be a hub that will allow others. So we already have the Art UK are going to be using the Museum Data Service as their core for getting data now, rather than having to go to individual museums for all their data. So we're creating this hopefully hub and spoke model where we can help kind of take it from this idea of share once, then facilitate sharing from there onwards. Yeah, which I think is really good.
Brilliant, exciting times. Justine, I wondered if you'd mind saying something a little bit more about what this might mean for the members of your subject specialist network in terms of collaboration, day-to-day stuff, extra workload, any reflections on that kind of thing?
Yeah, I was just thinking when you said about the drawbacks, what could the drawbacks be? And I'm instantly thinking capacity, time, funding, all of those things that impact hugely on an extra thing. So, you know, and if I'm thinking about why am I convincing people to use it? So we already have a sport database. Why am I saying to them, you need to use that and this? What is their benefit to them? So it's always ensuring that there is a benefit to them. You know, there's a point in them going and putting it there. Ensuring that they have the capacity and time. I think that is always going to be an issue, particularly for smaller organisations, particularly if they are museum-like collections. But so some sports clubs, for example, have, you know, very well catalogued collections that would fit well. Why should they put them on here? So it's making those arguments really clearly about why this is the place for those collections to go. So I think they could be some of the drawbacks. And I think it's easy to make some of those arguments, but I think as things move on, it's something that we need to consider across the subject specialist networks. And it will become more evident, I think, to some of the subject areas. It'll be easier for them to make those arguments than it is for others, depending on what the collections are. But I think there's, yeah, as I said earlier, I think there's still that lots of opportunity for the cross-sharing. We have lots of collections that don't just fit with museums. And I think some people put different questions about how does it talk to the other databases and things like People's Collection in Wales as well. So if we have collections in Wales, then we would generally say the Sporting Heritage database and the People's Collection Wales database. So how do the databases talk together? I think it's being really clear about all of those different things, and Discovery as well. We have loads of archival collections. So making sure that they're all really clearly accessible. There's a real clear understanding of why you go to one and not another, or how they talk to each other, and making sure that museums are using their time really, really sensibly so that they don't feel like, oh, well, I've put it on there, why have I got to put it on here? And we can always make that happen for them.
And it's how we convince, I don't know, art funds already fantastically supporting this project, but people further afield of the benefits of this, and it's kind of chicken and egg of, if you can't see the benefits, then you're not going to support it and all the rest. I'm very conscious that one of the defining issues, particularly of our sector over the last 5-10 years, has been decolonisation. I wonder if Miranda could ask you a bit more about your experience and potential there might be here for connecting with communities who've never imagined that collections relating to their cultural identity were in our organisations, and opportunities to have a two-way equitable relationship with communities and telling different histories. Would you mind saying something about that?
Yeah, well, I think the key thing, and I think Arran might have touched on this, is about keeping it simple also, and not too complex in terms of being able to search for information or retrieve information there. In terms of the decolonial aspect, it's great, as I said before, in terms of actually knowing where certain information or objects actually lie that were once connected together. I think it's still, in terms of, let's say, advertising to other communities whose heritage lies within our museums, there's still some way to go. And I think, Justine, as you were saying, that one of the issues that potentially with subject specialist networks is the same that would be the issue with communities. It's like, well, you know, why should I be looking here versus another place? So it's and this will happen over time, but for the museum's data service to become one of the more accessible and simple services to use to find the information that you want, that would then it'd be easy for you to drill down and get extra information elsewhere. So like you were saying, Justine, for other museums to be clear in what information they're providing, but ultimately the museum's data service is the central hub that you go to. It's really easy for you to find particular information, gather all the information together that's relevant for you, and then take it elsewhere. And also where there will be support for you to do that. Because a lot of communities that are trying to, because there's always an issue around embargoing of data, culturally sensitive to museums and also to those communities. And I get a lot of inquiries, and I say, oh, well, you know, if you just look on here, and then they come back to me and they say, oh, no, but we can't. And then there's an extra workload on the one. For instance, I'm not an anthropologist. I don't look after those kind of collections. But inevitably, because of the last couple of years, I'm a little bit of a more high profile curator of colour. And so people from the Black and Brown communities are often asking me how they can get access to data. And I want them to come elsewhere to lighten the workload, to go to like the museum's data service that can help them more. And, you know, there's a lot around, we talk about transparency, with that goes trust as well. And that even if data is embargoed, that they're going to get an answer from somebody about something, even if it's a short one, not just be left hanging, because then that means then people don't buy, you know, they're then just done with our sector, and then it continues that we're gatekeeping and hiding things. So a few challenges and a few benefits there in terms of decolonial practice.
Brilliant, thank you again. Just such an Arran, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to pop in there as well, if that's okay. I just think what Miranda said there was so important, that this idea of embargoing as well, and the museum data service potentially being a place. I think it would be really good that we think about accountability and transparency as a core part of how we handle this as well. A lot of the times, the data that has colonial lenses on it, that has kind of racial and different kind of colonial connotations to it. I suppose museums are afraid of releasing that, ashamed of it. But if you hide it, then it's not going to be fixed, because quite often we don't have the resources within the museums to go and recatalogue that. I think there's some work to do in developing confidence there, whilst balancing the potential harm that kind of data can still do. So I think there's a lot of work there, but it does require a bit of a leap of faith and stop gatekeeping that data as well from the museums, which is something I think that we can all take tentative steps carefully with each other to do on a place like Museum Data Service.
Brilliant, thanks. There's clearly a lot of work to do, and I guess we're finding our way very much over the next few decades. We're almost out of time, but picking up on some of the questions that have come from the audience around how you persuade IT or your other organisations to engage with this project and sharing data. So I'm just going to quickly go around each panellist to ask how they would persuade their organisation to participate in the museum's data service. We'll just finish with you, Arran, because you've got an advantage. Justine, would you like to start, please?
Well, I'm just having a look at a question that's in here around capacity as well. For me, and I know, I can say lots of really nice things about why it's important and why I believe that this is important, but it's going to be around funding. It's going to be around capacity. You know, if I can support organisations and say this is how it can, you've got some funding to support you to do it, but also then the benefit financially to your organisation is going to be this. I know that that's going to be one of the arguments, because they aren't all museums, but as museums, we need them all.
Brilliant, thank you. Miranda.
So what was the question again, David? How am I going to persuade my organisation to add to?
Yes.
Surely they don't need persuading. They're a big organisation. They should see the benefits in that, and some of them that I've explained as well. And also it's mutually beneficial. They come here, and even if it's just some core data there, then you're signposting to then go and find and drill down, for instance, more environmental data on the Natural History Museum data portal. So they should see it it's not exclusive, it's mutually beneficial. And it's also helping across the sector as well. We need to be helping one another, not just these great silos up and down the country and big nationals. You know, it's like we're all working together on this to help for a better future for everybody, and you know, future curators, environmentalists, and all sorts. So yeah. Yeah,
I think. Sorry, Arran. I think that's an excellent place to leave it. It's in all our best interest, and it's a story of hope and positivity for the sector going forward. Thank you ever so much to the panel. It's been fascinating to have this discussion, and I'm sure these continue across the day. Thank you ever so much, and back over to you, Sarah.